Okay. So I'd like to welcome Megan Dougherty. Start our afternoon off in fine style. I haven't finished your book, but I read half of it, and I had to stop and compose myself. I was laughing so hard, I had tears streaming down.
Thank you, Allison. That's the best compliment a quilt humorist could ever ask for, is I have tears running down my face, or I spit my tea all over my book, whatever.
Not all over your quilt.
Yes, not all over your quilt. No, that's a disaster. So yeah, I'm Megan Dougherty. I'm a quilting humorist, and I'm the author of Quilting Isn't Funny. This is my book. It's a collection of all the humor articles that I wrote for Quilter's Home magazine and Generation Q magazine. Please go right ahead. Between about 2009 and maybe 2012. And so, you know, whenever I tell people that I'm a quilting humorist, actually when I tell normal people what I do for a living, and that's people who don't quilt, I just say I'm a writer. But when I talk to quilters and they ask me, well, what do you do? And I say I'm a quilting humorist, they usually have two questions. One is, a what? What is that a real job? And it's not a real job in the sense that you can make a living from it and have benefits, but yeah, it's a thing. And the second question is, well, how did you get started being a quilting humorist? So I started as a quilting humorist because I started quilting. And when I started quilting, I was really, really bad at it. It was about 5.5 years ago, and I was a stay-at-home mom. I had 2 little kids, one of whom was 2 years old, and she was, I'm trying to think of a good word, awful, horrible. Love her dearly. She's a wonderful little girl, but she kept us hostage in the house because you couldn't go anywhere with her, and I was dying for something to do. And I had been the assistant editor of a local magazine for a while before the kids came along, and I was really desperate to write. And I needed some kind of creative outlet. But I didn't have anything to write about. I mean, everybody writes about their kids, and I thought, I just don't want to blog about my kids. Everybody blogs about their kids. What am I going to blog about? I got nothing to say. I got nothing to do. I know I'm going to learn how to sew. I'm going to learn how to sew, and I'm going to write about it, and this, I'll finally have something to write about. So I started myself a little blog, and I'm looking at quilting blogs and sewing blogs, and they're all just so chirpy and happy, and they have such pretty pictures with such gorgeous children and such pretty houses, and I'm not gorgeous and pretty and all that. So I thought, what am I going to call this blog? It's not going to be about all these lovely things that I'm going to make. It's going to be about the disaster that is coming by me learning how to sew. So I decided to call it, as a joke, The Bitchy Stitcher. And I thought that name will be taken. Everybody's thought of that already. Nobody had thought of that already. So I started my blog up, and I got myself a little Kenmore sewing machine. And I bought it at Sears, and it would cost me probably about $35. And I think it was made of paper mache, because if you set it down on a table and went, it would move back 2 inches. It was so lightweight, and it would only sew through maybe 2 layers of something. But that was my sewing machine. I didn't know any better. And I decided that before I started on my adventure with quilting, I was going to try to sew some clothing. I thought, okay, I'm going to make myself a skirt. I found a tutorial online for making a skirt out of a sheet. And I thought, this is so easy, because it's going to be, yeah, I know. Yeah. So I went down to the Salvation Army thrift shop, and I bought myself a sheet. And it was just, you know, you cut it, and you sewed one seam on the side, and you sewed the casing. And I was like, yay, I made myself a skirt. Yay, me, and look, here it is. And except I made the skirt for about 6 people to fit into it all together. You could all just, you know, get real cozy in there. Okay, well, that didn't go so well. Now I'm going to try quilting. And I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. And my mother and my sister were quilters, but they lived far away in Tennessee, so it wasn't like I could just go over to their house and ask them what to do. So I'm trying to make a 4-patch. And I don't know what I'm doing. It's just, I don't know that there are rotary cutters I don't know that there are rulers that you can use to square all this stuff up and make them into actual things. And I'm calling my sister on the phone going, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to do, you've got to help me, you've got to help me out, you've got to do something. She sends me supplies, and I finally managed to make a 4-patch quilt top. Not realizing when I made it, and I sent it off to her. Her shop, like here they have long arm services, so I sent it off to her to be quilted. And I didn't realize until I'm folding it up to send it to her that I had sewn on the 2 bottom rows completely upside down, but I didn't care. So I sent it off to her to have it back. And I wasn't in any great hurry to get this quilt back because I knew I was going to have to bind it. And binding this quilt was the scariest thing I could think of. It just seemed, it was like going to the dentist. You know you gotta, but you don't wanna. It was just, I couldn't figure out every picture I had seen of a quilt binding, and I had quilts at home because, like I said, my mother and sister were quilters, so I knew what they looked like. It looks impossible. If you've never sewn before, never quilted before, that binding looks like it's not possible for human beings to actually do this, especially if you do it by hand on the back. So I had gotten myself a book, and I'm going through all the instructions with the book, and it's just, it's the craziest thing I've seen. Just, it holds your hand through every little step, but it's all flippy, and you're doing things over here, and I'm trying to, when I get it all sewn together, and I figure everything out after I've unhooked it all 500 million times, and, you know, at one point I'm trying to do the part where you fold it and press it down, and the 2-year-old has got the end of this 3-foot thing tucked in the back of her diaper, and she's running away. I'm going, no, get back here. So then I get to the part where you have to sew it down, and now this book, this wonderful, wonderful book, was called A First Time Quilt Making, and it might even be here, back there somewhere. Like I said, it held your hand through every single step of making this quilt binding, but then at the very end, what it said was, hand stitch the binding to the back of the quilt. And that was it. And I'm flipping pages going, there's got to be more instruction than this, but there's not. There's not to hand stitch the binding to the back of the quilt. I don't know how. So again, I'm back on the internet and I'm looking at things, and I'm on YouTube, and nothing is helping. So I got my needle and I got my thread, and I think the knot I made was about this big. But it was a knot. And I started in the corner, and I'm holding, I don't know what to do, I don't know how you get on there, and I'm holding the binding down, and I managed to get about this far, hand stitching. I think there are 5 stitches in that space. Each stitch is about this long. Each one goes a different direction. And then I went, forget it. I am done. Forget it. And I decided I was going to machine stitch that binding down. Except, as I told you, my machine was made out of good wishes and good intentions by the good people at Kenmore, and it didn't want to sew through a binding and 2 layers of quilt and batting, so it was just like holding on for dear life trying to get this thing through the machine. And I swear that binding, it looks like I sewed it while my hair was on fire. It just goes all over the place. But I got it on, mostly.